Okay, everybody, we're ready to start the last panel. Please sit down. Attention, you in the back of the room. I see you. Come sit down. That's good. Nobody's doing it. Okay, we're going to get started now. The Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, Reflections on the Past and Priorities for the Future. I'm here just to introduce Rob Wallace, who will be our moderator, and I think you're going to be in good hands. Rob is a Wyoming native, born in Evanston, lived a lot of his adult life in Jackson, including working as a seasonal ranger in Teton National Park. He also has the big picture policy perspective from his role as Assistant Secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. That means he was the policy lead for Fish and Wildlife Service, who administers the Endangered Species Act, and the National Park Service, who manages Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone, among 4 other parks. And he also has excellent Hill experience, working on Capitol Hill, both as a staff person, working at Interior as a congressional liaison. So he understands that arena. And he also worked for a U.S. Senator from Wyoming. He also understands Wyoming state politics. He worked as chief of staff for one of our governors. And he has nonprofit experience on boards, including most recently the Haub School Board. He just joined us this fall. And I say all that because I want to end with what makes him a really great speaker for this. And that is because he took all those skills from all his various jobs and applied them at a time they were needed in 24 and 2025, when the last state parcel in Teton National Park was up for sale. There was a lot of political controversy over what should happen to this parcel. And he called on all those skills, his wide network, and was one of the people that helped get this important purchase over the finish line. So with that, I give you Rob Wallace.
Well, thank you. You get us for the last panel of this great conference, and I hope you stick around because I think you're going to find it stimulating. Whenever somebody reads a bio like that about me, I think of 2 things. One, you're all thinking he can't keep a job. That's true. And working as a seasonal park ranger out of college, I peaked too early in life. I don't know what happened, Chip. I should just should stayed where I am.
We take you back.
Yeah. I talked to my friend Todd Wilkinson last night, who I've known forever. We sat over here at Hayden's Post and reminisced about how our world has changed over the last several decades. And of course, Albert Summers and his very interesting presentation about what it is to be a landowner in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And Chip said something in his remarks that we're going to explore here a little bit more as a group. He talked about the 22 million acres of land in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, of which about 15 million belongs to the various federal agencies, and the other 7 is privately held. And in my experience, if those agencies and managers of those different entities can't figure out a way to play well in the sandbox together, we're in big trouble. Early on in my career, the Game and Fish Department, the National Park Service, and private landowners had very little trust among the 3 groups. They instinctively didn't like one another. They didn't trust one another. And I think thanks to the caliber of leaders that we have that we're going to introduce to you in a few minutes, that's changing. And we'll want to explore that a little bit as we go along. Our panelists today are Scott Christensen, the Executive Director of the Yellowstone Coalition, Angi Bruce, who is the Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish, and Chip Jenkins, who is the Superintendent of Grand Teton National Park. So all three of these individuals have a perspective about that premise that we laid out earlier about the importance of groups working together. And so let me, if I could, just start out the panel with maybe Scott, Angi, and Chip saying a couple of minutes about yourselves, and then to speak about that challenge about working together and how do we do that in a way that builds trust and kitchen table politics, if you will.
Okay. Thanks for sticking around. It's great to see a mostly full room here. As has been mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Yellowstone Coalition. For those of you who aren't familiar with the organization, we were formed in 1983 with the mission of working with people to conserve the land, water, and wildlife of this region, Greater Yellowstone. Our headquarters is in Bozeman. We have about 20 staff there. We have 9 in Wyoming right now, and a few over the hill in Driggs. And so we have folks all around the region working with state agencies and federal agencies, local communities, counties, kind of the whole spectrum of people that you find in this region. And I've been with the organization since 2003. So I've been working in this region, and I grew up in Idaho, close by. So this is my home. And I've seen obviously a lot of change over time, not as long as some who have been around longer than me, but quite a bit. And I guess my thought about how things have changed over time in terms of how we've worked together is that there have been kind of periods or chapters in conservation and management that I've kind of observed, even and heard about from others before me, that have been maybe more adversarial or conflict prone. There's still that certainly out on the in different places. We probably, the three of us, don't see eye to eye on all issues, but I would say that I've observed a trend towards trying to work better together generally. Conservation is not possible without people. We're both the challenge and the solution. And I think you heard that in probably every single presentation. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but we've got to get better as a community, whether as scientists, conservation NGOs, agency people, or people that just care about this place, at talking to each other and ensuring that the way in which we talk to each other is respectful and treats each person with dignity. And what I've observed over time is that the conservation that seems to be most effective and durable is the conservation, the solutions and the ideas and the processes that bring people along with them. And that means that at one level, we're all charged with being problem solvers in some way, whatever chair you sit in or hat you wear. If you care about this place or wherever it is that you're from, you have a charge, I think, of being a problem solver. And I think that starts with talking to other people and being okay with disagreeing at times and doing it in with respect and treating people again with dignity. But the reality is that the conservation that sticks in this region, and there are a multitude of examples of really positive, great advancements in conserving habitat and managing wildlife better, including more people. It all is about people. And we can all do better at that. I think about the work that we've started doing with, our organization started doing with tribes more intentionally in the last 5, 6, or 7 years that we should have been doing decades ago. but everything I've learned from Wes and other tribal colleagues along the way about how to work with people, their cultures, their backgrounds, their education, just where they're starting from. We all need degrees in human psychology. Can I just say that out loud? We're great at building beautiful maps. We're great at collaring animals. We're great at analyzing data. We get years of training to do that. We need to learn how to talk to people and meet them where they are and bring them in and help them be part of these of the solutions that we're trying to reach as we solve challenges to conservation in this region.
Well said, Scott. Thank you. I really liked when you exaggerated the people, because our mission for the state of Wyoming is to conserve wildlife and serve people. They're equal. They're on the same level. And you manage the wildlife. You tell us how to manage the wildlife. You and also people not in this room. You know, we are very fortunate in Wyoming. I'm very lucky to get to lead this agency that manages over 800 species. I believe we are the least developed state in the lower 48. We have more wildlife than people. Definitely proud of that. We have the most sage grouse in the world. We have the longest intact migrations in the lower 48. Incredible trout fisheries. Bighorn sheep. The last black-footed ferrets were found here. Sometimes we just have to pause and say, we live in an incredible place, and look at what we have done, and we have done something right to have this left. So I don't want us to forget to take time as we think of challenges and change to celebrate everything we have to celebrate here. And I'm honored every day to get to represent that. But one thing we know, and we all know, change is constant and there will always be change. But my personal philosophy is, let's shape it and guide it. Let's not respond to it. Let's get out in front of it. We know there's challenges coming to our state. We see them all the time. We look outside our borders. We work with our neighbors. We see the extra pressure put on the resource from development, from recreational users, from other people wanting to live in our great state. And instead of fighting it, we need to understand it, and we need to come around the table together. You know, one of the things I'm always struck by when people talk about we need to follow the science. Absolutely. But part of that science, just like we need to be psychologists, Scott, we need to understand the social science. We need to understand what the people want. And it's just as important as the biological science, and they have to work together for success. That might look different in the future than what it looks today, and we have to be creative and accept that. I was just at a national conference where I chair the Threatened and Endangered Species Committee. One thing we are talking about is assisted migrations. Does that give me goosebumps? Absolutely. You know, we want these important movements to stay open, but maybe they won't someday. And we have to think creatively of how do we deal with things like border walls? How do we deal with them? And just, you know, do we fight them? Do we advocate? Or do we come around the table and figure out what a solution is? And I think the best way to do that, and I'll pass it over to Chip, is really to start the conversation with your neighbor. And to start with, what are you celebrating? What's the goal? Where do you want to get to? And then start to think about how you get there. So often, I see the headline in the newspaper. We all get wrapped into it. We all get sucked into that advocacy and that fight. But I always say when we fight, there's a winner and a loser. And a lot of times wildlife ends up in the losing bracket. So we have to start it differently. Read beyond the headline, get the facts, don't buy into the rhetoric, and just dig deeper.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, Chip Jenkins, Superintendent of Grand Teton National Park. So I work for the national Park Service, right? I work for a national organization. You know, for the vast majority of Americans, they think that there are 5 units of the National Park Service. They all begin with Y. They're somewhere out west. Steam comes out of the ground. They have big trees, waterfalls, and they have animals that can kill you. And also the model of the national parks are that you draw a boundary around it and you kick everybody out. And that's not been my career. I started working in a place called North Cascades National Park Complex, 2 units of a national park, 2 national recreation areas. And part of what's there is 3 dams that generate more than half the electricity for Seattle. We have in parts of the units, we have trapping, hunting, gravel, sand rock and gravel mining, firewood production. So my first job in the Park Service was working in an environment there where it was about balancing, trying to find that path in terms of working for those uses at the same time that we were also, you know, there's conversations going on now about grizzly bear reintroduction in the North Cascades. That's how wild that place is. I had the opportunity to another place to work in the Santa Monica Mountains, just right on the Ventura, Los Angeles County line. The entire town of Malibu is inside the unit. And it was never intended that the National Park Service would own all of the property in the Santa Monica Mountains. And actually, it was always intended that actually the Park Service would be a minority land agency there. And a big part of what my job was actually to work with property owners, developers, Coastal Commission, and a variety of other folks to have negotiations over how development could proceed while at the same time trying to achieve conservation goals. And spent 9 years total in Yosemite National Park. One of the things I'm most proud of in my career there was actually working with the 3 counties to create the Yosemite Area Regional Transportation System, regional transportation system that 20+ years continues to operate in a very demanding rural environment. Just the point of all of that is the experience that I have in terms of sitting here in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem is having come from places where we didn't draw a boundary around it and kick everybody out, but rather we were trying to figure out how to achieve sustainable ecosystem. I said, you heard me on the first day, those of you that weren't asleep, were say that, you know, I think a big belief that we have come to learn is that sustainable ecosystems mean that we have places where we have recovered grizzly bears and we have wolves on the landscape at the same time that we have functional schools, right? We have world-class cold water fishing at the same time that we have quality healthcare. And so the only way that we can do that is by working with people, whether it's working across levels of government, federal, state, local, working with NGOs, working with concerned citizens. And I think we are incredibly fortunate that we live in an ecosystem that so many people care. I mean, so many people care at the state, local level. You all are here. You're still here at 3:15, you know, to continue to engage in the conversation. We're also lucky that at a national and an international level, people recognize that this place is significant and matter. And as a result of that, there have been investments at the national level here for decades that have helped us get here. And we've got, you know, a congressional delegation that cares about what you all think and are willing to engage and help us explore what local solutions look like and what resources might need. So, yeah. Back to you, Rob.
Thank you. Let me ask you all about, there's been a lot of fascinating ideas posited during this conference about things to do and not to do. What would you say the number one or number two challenges for this area are from your standpoint? What would, if you had to fix something right now or fix something in the short term, what is it, what are those one or two things that you would fix? Chip, let me start with you. And
I was hoping you were going to start with Angie because she's smarter than I am. Again, I think actually I would say one of the dominant themes from the conference is how do we continue to work with private property owners? How do we continue to work with private lands, working lands, to help them do what they have been doing for decades in terms of good conservation work? In a time just with all of the different pressures, we don't need to enumerate those now, but just how do we, with authenticity, with genuineness, with respect, work with those private property owners in order to be able to conserve this last best place?
Yeah, it's still on. Yeah, thanks for saying private lands. I come from private lands. I grew up on a farm in Iowa. My dad is currently harvesting his 71st year as a farmer. Pretty impressive. And one of my first jobs in Iowa was a private lands biologist. I got to work with landowners to restore habitat. So habitat and private lands is where my heart is and always will be. So definitely, Chip, I think you guys are an example of where that has been successful in the past, is looking outside those boundaries and understanding the whole ecology of the species that we're working with and how important it is to protect all of that. But I think from my perspective, when I think the challenges are that we could make some headway is how do we tear down the boundaries that separate us? So we had an opportunity at the beginning of this pilot program of the last administration to bring out leaders in our nation. So in one setting, I don't know if it's ever happened before, we had Fish and Wildlife Service leadership, we had BLM leadership, Forest Service leadership, our governor, everyone around a table brought to Wyoming to see what we could do together. And we made headway. We did a lot of good things. We brought in over $33 million extra to private landowners in a very short time period. But what we didn't do is go far enough. One of the things I would have liked to see is one plan, one set of operation. We have many federal agencies, many different types of local government and state government. We all have our plans. We all have our priorities. We all have our administrative processes. We all have them tied to congressional action, internal policies. Breaking those down and saying, this is our priority area, this is our priorities. How do we get there? How do we all throw money into the pot and achieve it without being limited by the constraints that we have in rules and regulations? That's a vision of mine. Maybe we'll get there, Chip. I'm looking at you guys. Like, how do we figure out to work together and not within our agency and our limitations?
thank you.
I think there are some real challenges in this region and threats to it. Several of which have been managed and mentioned and talked about here and over the last couple of days. Certainly the interface between growth and development and the loss of private lands is a huge challenge. The rate of development is far outpacing our rate of conservation, and that's a real challenge. The uptake of new ideas and innovative new strategies is encouraging, but as Arthur mentioned earlier, it needs to scale. And at a time when the federal government is stepping back in a number of ways, that's going to have real implications for states, for NGOs and private philanthropy. I don't think we can together fill that federal void. but we've got to find ways to be responsive to it. And so I see that private landscape, it's been mentioned several times, but as being kind of a final frontier for conservation here. And that means more work with landowners, more creative, innovative strategies, more funding. I just was talking to someone the other day who's just finished raising a $300 million fund for private land conservation here. And I don't know anything about how that's going to be deployed or used here, but boy, I'm happy to hear that. And be really interested to learn about what it means for accelerating our rate of conservation in some of these places. The second thing I guess I'll mention is that I did not think that I'd spend almost all of May and June involved in a national level fight about public lands. The concept of public lands in the West and its importance to rural communities in these states that we live and work and play in. On one hand, it was a kind of a disheartening thing to fight over. On the other hand, it was really encouraging to see people really unify across the political spectrum around public lands and their support for them. And we need to take that and build on it. And I just wrote a column for a newspaper recently that said the core message there was that it's not enough to defend public lands, whether it's national parks or our cherished forest areas or BLM lands. But with the rate of change that we're seeing, whether it's growth and development, outdoor recreation, climate change, whatever, we've got to be proactive and get ahead and start protecting some of these places. And it needs to be done, like I said earlier, with people and coming up with locally built solutions that can be durable long-term. The last challenge I'll mention before I turn it back to Rob is that the amazing thing to me, and that so often gets glossed over or taken for granted here, is that at the same time, the population in this region has grown rapidly. Our wildlife have come back. We reintroduced wolves, which are now flourishing. There are now, I can't speak to Wyoming, but I assume this is probably similar. But in Montana, we have more elk than we've ever had since white settlement. It's amazing to think about those two things happening, co-occurring at the same time. But that means that we're in a forever long challenge of managing the human-wildlife interface. And that means that it's incumbent upon us to wrap our arms around all of these new people in our region and get to know them and to help them learn about this place and care about this place. They're probably here for the same reasons all of us are here, and to get them invested in its future. And I think that's a huge challenge. The rate of growth is one thing, and we're not going to build a wall around Greater Yellowstone. People are going to keep coming. How do we work with those new people and help them understand that there are animals that will kill them here? That you have to operate in a little bit of a different way here. No offense to Iowa, but it's not Iowa. And being open to that and receptive to meeting new people and welcoming these new people into our community in a way that they feel included and part of finding solutions versus talked down to and vilified as part of that growth problem is really important. And again, like all of these things come back to human challenges and human solutions. And being open to working with each other to find a path forward.
Great, thanks. So Temple said I could ask any question I wanted. So I'm going to do that. My big background, I happen to be at the Department of Interior with the National Park Service and Fish and Wildlife Service when COVID hit. And that was a pretty dizzying time because, as every great from Teddy Roosevelt on down knew that nature has a curative part of it, that you you go outside when things are tough. But at the same time as overseeing an agency with 22,000 employees, they're thinking if that bonehead in Washington opens a park and I got to go to work, I may be at risk with the health of my family. And from my perspective, the standards changed a lot on social distancing, washing hands, PPE. It went over and over. And I've personally come to the conclusion that science has had a bad couple of years. And I don't know if you agree with that, but you are the not only the public interface between the policies of your agencies, but you're the public interface between the scientists of your agencies. And I'd be curious about if you want to hit the lever and I go down into the basement on that premise, or if you have some thoughts on it. So, Angi?
Good one. Rob, that's a good one. Yeah, science has taken a beating. It kind of breaks my heart, and I hope it breaks all your guys' just a little bit as well. I think it's something that we've talked about quite a bit here today, and we do a lot, is words matter. Part of the reason we see this shift in the nation, at least that I think, is because we talk in a way that separates ourselves from others. You nailed it earlier. Get to know people, understand how to talk to people and how to tell our story. One of my favorite jobs early on in my career, I was an environmental educator. I was a naturalist. One day I talked to preschool, one day I talked to college kids. I adapted every single day. Know your audience. And it isn't about, as scientists, we tend to hone on, I want to sound intelligent. I want to sound smart. I want them to know I have a PhD. Guess what? Who cares? At the end of the day, always say, what is my goal? What do I want to get across today? What do I want to resonate with them? And then talk in a way that they can understand. And I don't think the science community does us any good when we talk in a way that alienates our audience. And I see it over and over and over. And we keep, therefore, driving that wedge bigger. So when we come together, really think about the words, and then find that common ground first, and then continue to talk in a way that people can understand.
Oh, sorry. I was hoping it was just Angi. Yeah. Well said, Angi. Well said. I could not agree more in terms of understand your objectives, understand what your audience, and how is it best to be able to communicate with folks. I will add to that also. I think that I also think that we're challenged by folks that ecosystems are really complex. The interaction of the components of the ecosystem are fabulously complex. And the kind of science that we are doing for trying to understand ecosystems is not on the, generally speaking, I'm generalizing, generally speaking, on the same sophistication or complexity as human health. Folks who are expecting the kind of certainty around science for making the kinds of decisions that we have to make, compared to the kinds of decisions about whether or not a new medical treatment or a new drug is allowed to go to trial, let alone get into widespread use, is really different. And it will be interesting to see how things evolve over the next 20 years in terms of our ability to be able to do create the kind of knowledge, because the reality is that for as much as we know, we have to make a tremendous amount of decisions of uncertainty. An enormous amount of uncertainty. And I think that the public is kind of confused about that, about why so much uncertainty exists. And then in that context, I also think that our processes, at least at the federal level, could be more flexible to allow us more rapid adaptive management. I think that there has been a track record of making decisions that have a tendency to then be in place for a long period of time because it takes so much then to try to change it. And the world is changing at such a fast rate that we have to be able to be much more willing to be able to try something. Oh, that works. Okay, can we scale that up more? Try something that's not working the way that we intended. Maybe do we adjust or do we stop? So and yeah, so those are two kind of pressures I think that we feel.
Just a couple of quick observations on this question. It's funny that the couple of initial responses we had to the question about science was to talk about communication, how we communicate it, and two, how do we adapt, right, as we manage. I think that speaks to the fact that science is one critical, and we want to have the best science, but it's not the only thing. And I think having the world's best scientists working in places that were represented here in this conference, whether it's Greater Yellowstone or India or Nepal or Mongolia or Peru or any of the places that people came from, that is essential. And I hope you feel from, at least from a conservation and NGO perspective, I hope you feel seen and supported and you understand how important your job is. And that we need to find ways to work with you and the communities that are impacted by how we manage land, water, and wildlife to help them understand that science and help them come to solutions that work for people too. I'll add, the last thing I'll add too is that I think our definition of science needs to expand too, to include whether it's traditional ecological knowledge from the indigenous community or cultural and historic connections to land and place. One of the funny experiences I had a few years ago was being with Wes and some other people at the Wind River Reservation and looking at maps of migrating elk or mule deer, I can't remember which. And there are a bunch of tribal members in the room, and we're looking at these maps, and one of the gentlemen sitting there said, you know, you spent a lot of time and money collaring these animals. You should have just driven over here and asked us. And, you know, there's a couple thousand years or more, thousands of years worth of experiencing, you know, the movement of animals there that can help inform that. But I think that human dimension and how we define science is really, really important. People's lived experiences, people's long connections to place are important and need to be folded into how we think about data and information and management solutions.
Scott, you mentioned Mongolia and some of the other delegations that came a long way to share their insights about problems they have and opportunities they have. I wonder, from what you all have taken away from this session so far, if you've taken anything away from what you've heard from the folks that have come from other countries to share their ideas. Chip, would you start that, please?
Yeah, really glad I don't have to maintain elephant fences. Yeah, I think, next time I hear Cam complaining about trying to get bison exclusion, I'll be like, yeah, let's take a trip to Kruger. Forgive me, but I'll actually kind of come into this other way, which is, you know, I'm just thinking about we have all sorts of challenges that we face here. But I'm also, I think it's to the point Scott actually started with, is how incredibly blessed we are. I mean, generally, yes, it can be a dangerous place to work, but my rangers do not have to go to work at night wondering whether they are likely to get killed by a poacher every night. You know, thinking about people who are really, we live in a place where people need to make a living wage in order to be able to support their family. But being in competition with what, like, people literally having to put dinner on the table tonight, and how we're managing wildlife. I mean, we are incredibly blessed. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we are in a place of scarcity. And it's so inspiring to see what people are doing when they are truly coming from a place of scarcity. We have such abundance here. We have such abundance. We have such abundance of financial resources, of social capital, of relationships, of a commitment to a common purpose for conservation, that it gives me, I think there's a tremendous amount that we can learn in terms of how folks, how in conservation, the need for really to be working with folks on the land in a truly authentic and respectful way, and finding ways to apply that here, but recognizing actually how much abundance that we have.
You took mine, Chip. Yes, definitely it was that. That's what I took away too. A few years ago, I went to northern Thailand and stayed in a native village for a week, and their wildlife was gone because they needed it to survive. And so appreciate that we have struggles, but maybe they're more achievable than what I see from some of the other nations. But then taking that a step further and thinking about, we are fortunate. And why are we so fortunate? We have great energy. I mean, we're all sitting in here using the lights. And where does that come from? And so when we think about continuation into the future, we think about who else besides private landowners, we talked about this earlier, Chip, needs to be in this room in order to maintain that. So where are the energy developers, the miners, the ag producers? Where are the fiscal people who are funding those housing developments that are going in our migration routes and corridors? So we're very grateful for what we all have, and those other presentations and traveling the world has led me to believe that. But then that also means, how do we continue it and recognize that we all use those resources, just like we want all people to be wildlife enthusiasts, and inviting them to enter the conversation at the beginning when we're trying to solve the problems and not at the end.
Yeah, I am super inspired by all of the international speakers over the last 2 days. The perseverance and the hope and kind of the shot in the arm that I've received from that has been worth being here in and of itself. Beyond just the all of that, there's a few little practical ideas and innovative ways of thinking about things and doing conservation work here that I think I'll mull on and talk with our staff about. I mean, some of the ways that conservation work is getting done in Africa right now in a really challenging human interface by employing people in different creative ways, creating jobs where there didn't used to be jobs around managing humans and wildlife together. That's a strategy that I'll take away from this and think about. It's not that different than maybe some of the wildlife brigade work that happens at Grand Teton and that we've funded in different places, but a different twist on it maybe in some ways. I also think that the bringing people in from beyond our country into a conference like this has another great benefit of us not just preaching to the choir and having some different experiences and backgrounds and educations and contexts in which you're working in. and sharing that, being willing to share that with all of us has been really valuable. I think we're in a race that's based on ideas, basically, and the more that we can get together and share creative ideas and have big conversations that force us to think big and think differently, the better. Some of my favorite people that I connect with professionally are the ones where we can have big blue sky conversations and dream up a different future and a different world or a different way of doing things. That's a big part of why I've stuck around doing this work for at this one organization where I've been for 22 years, is it's given me a place to have like big, exciting, challenging, hard, all the things conversations, and then try and figure out, gosh, how do we like make that happen? And that to me is really exciting. It's really daunting, but to learn from people who are doing it in different contexts, especially really hard contexts that make our lives probably on the daily look pretty easy, is a good reality check for us and an amazing learning experience. And I just want to put in a plug for me coming to visit all of you. And I got to find a way to do that. But I want to bring a group to visit all of you and learn from you and see it all. And please know that you're always welcome here, whether it's an invite from John and Temple or from one of us. We want to exchange ideas. We want to learn from you. We want to share what we're doing here. And hopefully that makes all of our work better and more effective.
Continuing the theme of the unexpected. Can we talk a little bit about technology and how you all see the future of technology in your areas? I know when I started out, the idea was you shouldn't have any kind of a signal, beyond a road in a national park. And now, Angi, you can tell, or every hunter in Wyoming can tell exactly what piece of land they are, and you probably can hire rangers to work up north that can contact a daycare center now to find out how their kids are doing it. Tell me about how you all are thinking about the use of technology in the future in your space. And Chip, would you go first on this?
Yeah. Wow, that is yeah, I think that the use of technology is really, it's kind of on the it's on the public side, and then it's on the operation side. And I'll say, my thoughts on this have been, morphed over the years. Yeah, there was a time where I was squarely in there shouldn't be cell phone signals or in the parks. I've changed. I mean, this is an incredibly powerful tool for enhancing two things: enhancing people's understanding of what it is that they are seeing and experiencing by accessing information, and by being connected to somebody they care about and wanting to share that experience with somebody else. And I think we are social beings, and we process our emotions, we process our spirituality in part by interacting, by talking and by sharing with those that we care about something that touches our heart. And so if it helps a person feel more connected to this place in order to be able to FaceTime or Zoom or share a photograph of of something that they're doing, like, I'm for that. The way technology is advancing so rapidly now, I mean, I remember there was a Secretary of Interior that issued an order to say that you could not buy a smartphone that had cameras on them, because why would you possibly need that? And so I think the point of that is not criticism of that person so much as it is the human ability to the creativity that we have, that when we are given a tool and how that tool may be used, it's hard to fathom where we're going. There's and I'll just give one example, right? There's a technology called LiDAR, generally, right, developed for mineral exploration, oil exploration, right? People are experimenting with how to use a LiDAR sensor on a highway so that it could sense whether or not there's an animal on the road that would then trigger a sign to say, there's an animal on the road in front of you, and use that instead of building a $20 million wildlife crossing, maybe putting up a couple $1,000 sensor with $100 sign. So just thinking about how technology that is used in many different sectors might be applied in conservation. We are at the bottom of a very, very steep curve. And it's going to be fascinating how some of you out there right here today will hopefully be back here, or back in a similar conference in 2 or 3 years, showing us how some of that's used.
Yeah, so Temple, it's not lost on me that this conference started on October 1st, when 90% of our big game hunting seasons opened in this state. So technology when it comes to hunting and angling is a whole nother can of worms, but definitely one that we're addressing and having conversations all the time on. Fair chase, what is ethical, how much is too much? That conversation is just going to continue to happen and get harder. But Chip really talked about it too, this idea of how does it make our jobs easier? In state government, we will not get more positions. I can foresee the future, and we will be with our 440 positions in game and fish, we'll be consistent probably for at least the next decade. So how do we do more? Because we need to do more and better. It's with technology. When we can use LiDAR or drones or whatever thing is, instead of sending our staff up in small airplanes to count. It's a huge safety concern. And so this new technology we're experimenting with to understand how we can use that to count, to monitor, to track wildlife in all sorts of different ways. The sky's the limit. We actually cannot move fast enough through all the opportunities, but it will make us more efficient and it will make us better. And the research that we can get done and the understanding of what habitats our wildlife are using and how they're interacting is through the roof. We'll see it just skyrocket in the next few years. It'll be pretty incredible. And then at the same time, helping our staff operate in a more safe environment, and then being able to take our staff and do other things. I'm really, really looking forward to that and see where we go.
This is like one of those topics that I've seen come up at many conferences recently. And I feel like how it tends to go is like a person like me who's pretty disconnected from a lot of technology trying to tell you all something about technology. And I don't want to do that. I'm not even going to try to attempt to do that. It's fundamentally changing every aspect of our lives right now, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And it's moving at a pace and a scale at which that it's hard, I can't even really fathom. I was thinking about the next, AI program that's like an app on your phone that's like National Park Superintendent app. That's like, already thought about what you should be doing, Chip, like 7 steps ahead of when you need to do it. And I sort of joke about that, but gosh, maybe we're not that far. I think about like scenario planning exercises right now and the capabilities of AI to generate possible responses to 47 different things happening or whatever. I just think it's changing in a big way. One of the thoughts that I've been mulling recently is that I think conservation in general, it's probably across the board, whether it's NGO, state government, local government, academia has maybe a different model that helps with this, but we need to be much better at engaging young people and providing them opportunities to get a foot in the door in the world of conservation. And I can't help but think that technology may be a path to doing that. I think about my son who's 21 years old. He's in his third year of college. He's studying computer science. He knows so much more about this space than I do. And he doesn't know exactly what he wants to do with that degree or what problems hopefully he wants to solve in the world. But I would hope that we can capture a big group of those computer science people and folks that are young and getting into tech and say, conservation is where you want to spend your time and talents. And I feel like maybe that we need to modernize a bit and get with the times a bit more in terms of providing opportunities and entryways, pathways into conservation for people who are on that cutting edge of technology, and have that be the doorway in, and have that be the solution to some of our most vexing challenges, because it's not going away, it's only accelerating. And it can do a lot of good for the world. It also has a lot of inherent challenges with it. I think about the disconnection that it can cause between nature and people, and that has lots of downsides as well. But maybe it's a pathway for us to engage younger people and to make our work more powerful, more responsive, more proactive to changes that are coming in the future.
Great. Let's give the panel a hand. That's great. You guys are terrific. And Temple, John, let me say, what a great conference. There's as many people here at the close as there were at the start. I've never been to a conference like that. So good work.
Thank you. Thank you. What a great concluding panel, and just a few concluding remarks. First of all, again, just echoing the thanks to our panelists, our speakers, our attendees, for rich and inspiring 2 days of conversation, learning, and connection. We set out to convene a global dialogue around challenges and opportunities of conserving wildlife and large landscapes, and I believe we've taken meaningful steps towards that goal, so thank you all. Chip Jenkins reminded us that Yellowstone is both local and global. John Kaprowski showed us how large landscapes everywhere face accelerating pressures that demand collaboration. And Todd Wilkinson, through Grizzly 399, reminded us how one animal can reshape values and conversations around coexistence. These keynotes captured the heart of the gathering: Yellowstone's challenges, global lessons in conservation, and stories that connect people and wildlife. With that in mind, I want to reflect briefly on our 4 themes: Indigenous and local communities, human and wildlife coexistence, boundaries, and change, and how they point us forward. On Indigenous and local communities, a clear theme of this conference has been that Indigenous and local communities must be central to shaping conservation futures. OSA's reflection on co-governance in the Arctic and the role of reindeer herding communities reminded us that conservation success succeeds when people who live with wildlife every day have a real voice in the stake in decisions. Closer to home, Albert Summers reminded us that Wyoming's ranching and rural voices are equally essential. The GYE, like landscapes worldwide, must continue to evolve in how it listens, shares power, and builds responsibility across both Indigenous nations and local communities. On human-wildlife coexistence, Dr. Yala reminded us from India that coexistence with tigers depends as much on cultural values as on policy, while Dan Thompson showed us how Wyoming has adapted carnivore management and conflict prevention on the ground. Building on these perspectives, Leslie highlighted the critical role of private landowners in shaping coexistence across the West, and Francesca drew from decades of wolf recovery in Europe to show how science and collaboration can transform conflict into opportunity. There were so many wonderful perspectives shared by Esther, Harrison, and Mariana. Together, these perspectives underscored a common lesson. Tools like compensation, deterrence, and incentives matter, but lasting coexistence ultimately depends on values, partnerships, and trust. Boundaries, whether political, institutional, or cultural, are often where conservation breaks down. But we also heard inspiring models for building them, for bridging them. Arthur Middleton reminded us that migratory species in the GYE demand coordination across agencies, tribal nations, and working lands, while Oscar's keynote from Kruger showed how cross-boundary collaborations among communities, agencies, and international partners is essential for resilience at scale. Other speakers, from Julie on tribal sovereignty and co-management to Katie and Pooja and Craig and Camilla and Sai, added examples from Africa, Mongolia, and Europe. The lessons for the GOA is clear. Fragmented systems only succeed when we strengthen the connectors, institutions, partnerships, and shared narratives that bind them together. Change is constant in large landscapes, but not just ecological, legal, political, and cultural change. Bob Kiter reminded us that evolving laws and values have always shaped conservation in the GYE, while Dr. Subadi showed how Nepal is confronting climate pressures, land conversions, and biodiversity loss through community-based conservation with transboundary collaboration. Justine described Mongolia's efforts to safeguard snow leopards amid development, and Benoit highlighted biodiversity conservation in Borneo under palm oil expansion and fragmentation. And finally, Susan Clark emphasized that adaptive governance and values-based decision-making are essential if we're to navigate such complex shifting systems. Together, these voices showed that change is not only a stressor, but also an opening to adapt institutions, strengthen partnerships, and reimagine the narratives that guide conservation. So as we conclude, I want to leave us looking forward. In the next few weeks, we'll make the video recordings and presentations from this conference available on the conference website. These will be a great resource for classrooms, for colleagues, for partners who couldn't be here, and I encourage you to share them widely. We're also contemplating maybe an edited volume that could capture the richness of the conversations and extend their reach. If you have ideas about how we might increase the impact of this gathering through publications, collaborations, and future convenings, please share them with us. This conference was never meant to be a one-time conversation. My hope is that it becomes a beginning of a continuing exchange of ideas and practices across landscapes and communities. Thank you for being a part of it and for carrying this momentum forward in your own work. So thank you all for being here.